Howdy. Welcome to Ausgrave Royalty. I am Justin. In this video, we're continuing our series with King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Robert L. Moore and Douglas Gillette. We're starting to near the end of the season. So to those who have made their way here, I appreciate it. If it's your first time, be sure and check those other videos out. And I also have a season 1 where we covered archetypes by Dr. Anthony Stevens to lay some of the theoretical groundwork for what we're doing with the application of archetypes more so in this season as compared to just theory in the last one. In this video, you've seen the title, kind of an abstract idea and sort of something that's been occurring as I've been reading throughout all this literature. But Robert L. Moore himself was a practicing psychotherapist in Chicago. So naturally, with what he and Gillette are covering, it's inevitable that comparisons and viewing the information through a clinical practice lens would be the natural thing that makes sense. So transformation is therapy. There's a lot baked into just those 3 words. So we've talked a lot about transformation on the channel in terms of archetypal constellation, as in, well, there's 2 ways to look at it. So let's say the mother archetype, right? Either it's actualized or you're being shadow possessed by it. And I'm kind of TLDRing it right now. But there's what in childhood what can occur is archetypal frustration. So you basically don't receive the adequate, good enough mothering for the archetype, and that results in dysfunction. That's what the material we've been covering articulates, basically. So the story goes, basically. And that goes with all the other archetypes, father archetype, or just the family dynamic, archetype of initiation we've talked about, and King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, of course, all the different archetypes. Now, transformation has particularly to do with the magician archetype, as we've covered. Magicians are what we call people who initiate the next generation into society. And they do that by navigating the 2 different types of sacred space: liminal space and liminoid space. And we'll talk about each of those in a moment. Liminal basically is the sacred experience, and when you're in it, you're being cooked, like alchemically, like your psyche, there's transformation occurring. Liminoid is just everyday experience. Granted, everyday within liminoid space, it can be everything from sleeping in, kind of in a half, lazily just laying in bed, or it can be a fancy, very planned out trip to Italy. There's a large bandwidth of it, but the point is that if there is no fundamental transformation in your psyche, then it resides in liminoid space. A fancy trip to Italy may be amazing, may be fun, may be novel, may be a great time, very pleasurable, but it won't fundamentally change who you are, so to speak. So let's get into it. This is about how navigating those kinds of dynamics between those spaces can be therapeutic. I have a lot of notes in front of me, so um, yeah, it's like the hero's journey that, like the nature of transformation. In the hero's journey, the hero's like complacent. It starts out in the ordinary world, and then there's like a call to adventure, and sometimes, often, there's a refusal of the call. Rocky, for example, did not want to fight Apollo Creed right away. There's trials, then there's the ordeal in the belly of the whale, in the inmost cave, and then there's the ordeal. Yeah, so, and then after that, the hero returns with the boon, Boon, the boon, the change or the power or the transformation that benefits the tribe, benefits the ordinary world upon his return. And it's always a benefit. And because it's a benefit, we can say that the world gets better objectively, or we can say that it expands objectively. Like there are now more possibilities. Now there's more awareness. And this is the same in the alchemical process, which we've talked about. People have a prima materia, an issue at hand, so to speak. It is placed within a sealed container, metaphorically. This could be a specific like frat initiation. It could be a workplace training. It could be whatever. Typically, these are overseen by ritual elders, people who know the process and how to cook something so that there's a result, that there's a certain desired result that will benefit the tribe, that will benefit the frat, that will benefit the company, you know? And then it's cooked, and some people can come out undercooked or overcooked. And undercooked means that transformation did not take place. There wasn't enough heat, or there was a breach in the boundaries in the container, such as one of the frat elders warns an upcoming initiate of all the tricks in the upcoming hazing. So they'll get through it, but the point of the hazing is that it's a transformative experience, like a death and rebirth, so to speak, albeit less dramatically. But the person who already knows what to expect, they now have the framing to not. They basically been robbed of their transformation. You know, the elder frat bro may have thought that they were like placing a benefit on the newcomer, but it was actually robbing them of a powerful experience. So, and somebody overcooked would be somebody who gets traumatized by the hazing. Like normally it's just a silly frat hazing, but it goes way too far for based on one person's experiences. They get like mental institutionalized and ruined for life. It was just so traumatic. They were radically overcooked by the experience, so to speak. So, like, forgetting about all the archetypes for the moment, just ask yourself, have you ever been, like, curious about how some experience might affect you? Have you ever, like, thrown yourself into the deep end to see what happens with, like, something new? Like, just, there's the phrase shaking things up. And this has been something I've been doing repeatedly, probably too much in the past few years, recent years. I've just been trying all these new things, like a bucket list kind of thing. Like I haven't, typically people do this sort of thing when they're diagnosed with a terminal illness or something. They're like, oh, I only have a few months to live or something, so I'm going to do all these things. But I ain't waiting for that. So I've just been trying all sorts of things. I tried stand-up comedy, drawing pixel art. I'm learning Unity right now. I've learned to compose electronic music, started a YouTube channel, which involves research, marketing, learning YouTube, the algorithm, blah, 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 designing thumbnails, graphic design. I tried jujitsu, but it didn't take. Not because, for the reasons you might think. Quick rant here, tangent. I don't want to leave a vacuum and then have y'all guessing, but I don't I don't mind the awkwardness. I don't mind being in the gi. I don't mind the physical intensity. As a matter of fact, I'm there for the physical intensity. I'm there for learning how to defend myself, blah, blah, blah. What I don't like is that they typically show you the move a couple times and then you have to kind of be annoying. And if you're new, you just have to be really annoying and you kind of slow the class down. And it's uncomfortable already, but that just kind of layers on. And then you quickly realize that if you have you really need a friend to go with you so that you can practice like the grabs on each other outside of just the class. There's no way people just remember how to do jujitsu for like that 30-minute, hour-long class, whatever. And then they're like, oh, I got it. I've memorized it forever. Like you have to practice over and over and over again. And like, it's annoying. So I found that like I didn't have a way to create another person to like go with me or like have a training dummy or something. There was no way I could practice to feel like I'm making any sort of headway. So that was too frustrating. That's why I stopped. And really, I'd love to get into martial arts, but that's what holds me back. I think I can't just conjure up a sparring partner. Maybe I'm overlooking something obvious, and I'm a newbie to all that like culture. So, I'm willing to accept that, but that was my experience, and not all the experiences are going to win, right? But I wanted to try. But my point in saying all this is that, like, you never know. Like, people say X, Y, and Z, right? Like, oh, I did this and I had this result, so therefore you should try it. Like, it could be anything from like, this food was delicious. This is the best burger I've ever had, or this movie was amazing, or you got to check this track out. Like, basically, it's that person confessing their own kind of transformation. But, it's not a guarantee of the kind of transformation it'll affect on you. There are like 5 steps to become a millionaire, or the 10 habits millionaires have. So if you are doing these 10 things, you are guaranteed to become a millionaire. No. These are things that worked for those people based on their kind of personality, based on the way they see the world, all the millions of nuances and how they navigate their eye for business, their capacity for organization. Like, within that context, those are the 10 steps that worked, All I'm saying is, like, maybe things that you've heard about and heard that they affect individuals in a certain way, maybe it's time to throw all that out the window and just say, you know what? What happens if I try it and I see it for myself, And this is similar to the alchemical process. Like, you put yourself in a new situation, you're basically placing yourself in a different kind of sealed container. And then when you're in it, when you're doing jujitsu or you're doing whatever, you're being cooked. Heat is being applied. And jujitsu for me was undercooked. Like, I went in and I was undercooked. Like, the culture, the learning curve, I just couldn't get into it, But like pixel art, I have the bug. Like, I was properly cooked and I want to do a lot more. I designed like this little radar. I'm planning a strategy game, and I designed this like radar building and I animated it in Sprite, and it was really, really raw animation. But I was like, oh my God, this is so fun. Like, I am not an artist at all. They all look like second grader, kindergarten stick figure things, and I'm like, I can't draw, but Do I want to pay somebody a ton of money to draw? Maybe I'll learn to draw. Even badly, you know? I'll pay with my time. But to be continued. And joke writing, you know? I have the bug on that. I'm planning on a comedy channel pretty soon, to be determined. But I love writing jokes, and there's an art to it and all that, so I still do that. I was properly cooked for that too. Anyway, yeah, I'm looking at my notes. So Robert Moore and Gillette, they express an urgent, dire observation, which is that the modern world, one big problem with it, and there are many, one big problem, and perhaps the main problem, because it's very upstream, which is that there are no real proper initiations in the modern world. There's like getting your degree or joining the military or starting your first big boy job or taking some sort of chance or whatever. But initiations historically, anthropologically, have always been overseen by an informed ritual elder for a very specific purpose to benefit a set group of people. And this is why there's the comment that primitive cultures are, in terms of culture, there's an argument to be made that they're culturally more advanced, that we've gone backwards. We've gone technologically forwards and culturally backwards. And this is I've brought this up on the channel several times before, but there's a video about goblins and dwarves and how they invent things by Jonathan Peugeot. I'll link it below. And it's about how these trickster creatures, they're great inventors, and they work in the darkness, and they create things out of the darkness like technology. But they always put a trickster element into it, such as social media, right? Social media, it's almost oxymoronic because it makes us, while connecting us technologically, the trick is that it atomizes us. We're more separated than ever. Another observation that Peugeot made, I think it was in the video, but like when we go from the horse to the car, we lose connection with nature. We lose like animal husbandry. We lose those potentially meaningful, socially gluey social interactions on the trail, you know? Yeah, it might have taken a lot longer and it may have been more hazardous, but now we're in these kind of like rapidly moving steel coffins. We're separated from one another. There are traffic jams, pollution. I'm not a climate change guy, but for the most part, but you know, I'm just saying it is one cost. You get an oil industry, you get all these things, and they're kind of tricks that fly on. And I like that word tricks, because if you had seen the previous video on the magician archetype, one of the shadow possessions of the magician is the trickster. And it's somebody who's basically who's more cunning than wise. And the epitome of the magician, like the ideal version of the magician, is what's called the shaman, more in Gillette's terminology. And it's somebody who tries to just expand the world as much as possible. They channel the divine energy and they bring it to the people. They usher people in and out of the sacred and profane realities, the liminal and the liminoid. They're guides. They're very empathetic. They know society's rituals. They know how to be there for people. They know how to see people, like validate their experiences. And we just have very little of those people, very few of those people left. And magician, like shaman, usually work in what are called ritual spaces, sacred spaces. I don't know if you've seen the movie Northman. I loved it. But there's a great example of all this with the scene with the boy, Ethan Hawke and Willem Dafoe. And they're acting like dogs, literally. And it's like a ritual. And Willem Dafoe is like, he's the shaman. He's putting them in through with drug use and all that, and ceremony, and presenting themselves in certain ways, and having them crawl through this chamber and all that. Like, it's a sacred space, and they are transformed. Like, we don't have those experiences in the modern world typically, but more in Gillette. And I like this. Instead of being pessimistic and saying that you can't put the genie back in the bottle, they're optimistic that it's not too late to bring these kinds of things back. So it could be that the fact that, so all these, let's back up. All of these initiatory processes or archetypes or whatever, they're all tied to survival. And the point of an initiation was to transform the boys into men. Because when you have more men with a capital M, that is to say, men socially adapted properly to the tribe that it happens to be in, a man who knows the tribe's customs, a man who values those customs and defends them, a man who is physically capable to go out and bring back the protein, and typically, or ideally, the lore and the customs of the tribe would inform and put people in the right, put the hunting parties in the right mindset to most likely be successful. That may sound complicated, but again, in the Northmen, right? There's the scene where the berserkers, they have that berserker dance before they raid that village. Why did they do that? Is that just stupid primitive BS? Of course it isn't. It's a ritual to get them in the mode to ready to kill ruthlessly and go into a berserker trance, right? And I brought this up in a previous video. Richard Grannon, who taught self-defense and urban warfare kind of thing, in an urban self-defense or something like that. I know him from his talks on narcissism, but I think in a previous life he taught that as well. But he coined this term, I think, called supra states, S-U-P-R-A states, which is like a state to get. He trained people to get in this state really quickly so that they could defend themselves mercilessly, and then come back out of it. So, like, you had mild-mannered businessmen and women, but if they were being assaulted, they would need to snap in and defend themselves, and then snap out of it. There are dangers, though. I'm going to cover a couple of these. Like, people can try and mimic going into sacred space by getting addicted to drugs and alcohol. A lot of people, and I heard this from Molyneux, watched this great presentation on Robin Williams and the death of Robin Williams and about his life and all that. Like, some people, like, the average person's maybe base is 80, and they have a really good experience, and they go to like 100, right? Oh, that was fun. Then they come back down to 80. But if you've been archetypally frustrated, that is to say, potentially abused, or there was neglect in your upbringing or whatever, then you're at 20 baseline. But when you do drugs and alcohol, you kind of feel normal and you go to 100, but then you come back to 20. So you can get stuck in this kind of poor man's liminality. Like you think it's a sacred thing, but it's corrupt and it does harm, right? Another thing is on the opposite hand, when you're stuck in that liminoid space, in that false liminal sacred space, instead of that, you could go through what's called chronic liminality, which is people getting stuck in sacred space and have trouble coming back down to earth. So this can be when there's like a grieving process, or ruminating on rent-free thoughts in your head, or forgetting that there's more to life than your career or your gym or just making money or whatever. Basically Rambo, right? He's a great character for this. Like the point of his character is he's unable to turn it off, right? He's in a chronically liminal state. He thinks he's at war all the time, and war can be a sacred space. You're in like this crazy situation. And speaking of that, so again, like in the magician lecture, we talked about how people going through a grieving process would be made taboo from the surrounding tribe. And it was understood that for a duration of time, they would be allotted the appropriate space to go through their crazy time. That's what they called it. I was like, I have in my notes, can you imagine that in 2022 in the West? Like, oh, he just went through something, let him be. It's more like, you are coming into your shift. I don't care if you just got maimed. Like, who am I going to get to cover? So typically there'd be like a shaman, as we said, to guide you through like the grieving process. Like, we get it, kind of like a therapist, but more closer to like Willem Dafoe, like drink this potion, do this dance. I think there's one where people get like, it's not about grieving, but one initiation I heard was like people get covered with ants and it like eats something off of them, and then it symbolizes them dying and then being reborn. They rise back out of it, something like that. And these may sound like highly nuanced, but when you have a whole culture and you have a series of these initiatory processes, what you don't get is an identity crisis, which is what we largely have in the West, especially for men. Men are kind of seen as broken women. Their imperative is to protect and provide, but the government does that in the form of military, police, and then you have the welfare. So women are incentivized to become single mothers because they can sleep with bad men and not die, which is what it used to be. Now they can take crazy risks, and with birth control, it just opened the door, and now you get the rise of single mother households, but then there's no father archetype for a whole series of generations, and without the father archetype, you get a decrease in empathy and all sorts of things. Empathy is, and don't take my word for any of this, like I'm just giving you the highlights. This is, yeah, it goes with anything I'm saying, but Google it basically. But imagine if like there were initiatory processes for all kinds of life situations, right? And Moore and Gillette are writing in the late 80s, early 90s. This is like 35 years later. I mean, it's way worse now than when they were writing. But yeah, I just wanted to call attention to all this. We're kind of out of time now, but Moore and Gillette said in their practices, patients often come to therapy just to be seen and validated. And especially men's existences are very, it's more human doing than human being. And just being validated is a transforming thing. So I just wanted to talk about all that. Have a good one. See you all in the next one. Comment down below. Bye-bye.